What if the birth of the United States was not inevitable, not destined, but balanced on a knife's edge, saved by storms, spies, smallpox scars, frozen rivers, and the stubborn resolve of farmers who dared to challenge the greatest empire on earth? The American Revolutionary War did not erupt from a single musket shot, nor did it unfold as a simple contest between red and blue uniforms. It was a global struggle, disguised as a colonial rebellion, a civil war among neighbors, and a war of ideas that reshaped the Atlantic world. Between 1775 and 1783, 13 British colonies along the eastern seaboard of North America transformed themselves into a republic, fragile, improvised, and radically new. The outcome was far from certain. In fact, at multiple points, American independence hovered close to collapse. The roots of the conflict stretch back to 1763, when the 7 Years' War ended with the Treaty of Paris. Britain emerged victorious over France, gaining vast territories in North America. But victory carried a staggering price. The British national debt had nearly doubled. Parliament concluded that the American colonies, beneficiaries of British protection, should shoulder part of the financial burden. Thus began a series of revenue measures: the Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Duties, and eventually the Tea Act. To Parliament, these were rational fiscal policies. To many colonists, they were violations of constitutional rights. The phrase, "no taxation without representation," became a rallying cry. Colonial assemblies insisted that only their elected representatives could levy internal taxes. Tensions escalated. In 1770, British soldiers fired on a crowd in Boston, killing 5 civilians in what became known as the Boston Massacre. Propaganda turned the incident into a symbol of tyranny. In 1773, protesters boarded ships in Boston Harbor and dumped 342 chests of tea into the water, defying the Tea Act. Britain responded with the coercive acts, called the Intolerable Acts by colonists, closing Boston's port and tightening imperial control. In 1774, representatives from 12 colonies convened in Philadelphia at the First Continental Congress. They did not yet demand independence. Instead, they sought redress within the empire. But events soon outran moderation. On April 19, 1775, British troops marching to seize colonial military supplies in Concord encountered armed militia at Lexington. Shots were fired, the shot heard round the world. The skirmishes at Lexington and Concord marked the beginning of open war. When the Second Continental Congress assembled in May 1775, they faced a staggering challenge, organizing resistance without a formal nation. They appointed George Washington, a Virginian with military experience from the French and Indian War, as commander-in-chief of a newly formed Continental Army. Washington understood the enormity of the task. His troops were inexperienced, poorly supplied, and enlisted for short terms. He would later write that maintaining an army was like holding a rope of sand. In June 1775, colonial forces fortified Breed's Hill overlooking Boston. British troops assaulted the position in what became the Battle of Bunker Hill. Though the British ultimately captured the hill, they suffered over 1,000 casualties. The heavy losses stunned British commanders and proved that colonial militia could stand against regulars. Yet the war's direction remained uncertain. In early 1776, Washington achieved Washington's first strategic success by placing artillery, captured at Fort Ticonderoga and transported across winter terrain by Henry Knox, on Dorchester Heights. The British evacuated Boston in March. For a brief moment, optimism surged, but even as muskets flashed, a more radical transformation was underway in print. Thomas Paine's pamphlet Common Sense, published in January 1776, electrified colonial opinion. Paine argued that monarchy itself was absurd and that America had a destiny as an independent republic. His language was direct, accessible, and incendiary. Within months, the idea of independence moved from radical fringe to mainstream demand. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence. Drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson, it proclaimed that all men are created equal and endowed with unalienable rights. The document was both a justification of rebellion and a philosophical statement. It listed grievances against King George III and declared the colonies to be free and independent states. Yet declaring independence did not secure it. The British responded with overwhelming force. In the summer of 1776, a massive fleet under General William Howe and Admiral Richard Howe arrived in New York Harbor. Washington attempted to defend Long Island but was outmaneuvered. The Battle of Long Island was a crushing defeat. British troops nearly trapped the Continental Army. Only a daring nighttime evacuation across the East River, concealed by fog, saved Washington's force from annihilation. New York City fell to the British and remained under occupation for the duration of the war. Washington retreated across New Jersey, his army dwindling. Enlistments expired, morale plummeted. Many believed the revolution was finished before it had truly begun. Then came a gamble. On Christmas night 1776, Washington led approximately 2,400 men across the ice-choked Delaware River. The weather was brutal. Snow and sleet lashed the troops. Their target was Trenton, where Hessian mercenaries hired by Britain were stationed. At dawn on December 26, the Americans attacked. The surprise was complete. Nearly 1,000 Hessians were captured. A week later, Washington struck again at Princeton. These victories were small in scale but immense in psychological impact. The revolution breathed again. The war evolved into a complex struggle of maneuver and endurance. In 1777, the British launched a plan to isolate New England by seizing control of the Hudson River. General John Burgoyne marched south from Canada, but his advance slowed. American forces under Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold confronted him near Saratoga, New York. In October 1777, Burgoyne surrendered his army. The Battle of Saratoga became a turning point. It convinced France that the American cause had viability.
In 1778, France formally allied with the United States. The entry of France transformed the war from a colonial rebellion into a global conflict. French naval power challenged British supremacy. Later, Spain and the Dutch Republic would also enter the war against Britain. The conflict spread to the Caribbean, the Mediterranean, West Africa, and even India. Britain now faced enemies on multiple fronts. Yet 1777 and 1778 also brought severe hardship. Washington's army encamped at Valley Forge during the winter of 1777-1778. Food was scarce, disease rampant, soldiers lacked adequate clothing, thousands fell ill. But Valley Forge was not merely a tale of suffering, it was a crucible of transformation. Baron Friedrich von Steuben, a Prussian officer, drilled the army in European military discipline. By spring, the Continental Army emerged more cohesive and professional. Meanwhile, the war tore at the fabric of American society. Loyalists, colonists who remained faithful to the crown, numbered perhaps 15 to 20% of the population. They faced harassment, confiscation of property, and exile. The revolution was as much civil war as anti-colonial struggle. Families split, neighbors spied on neighbors. The conflict also exposed contradictions within the revolutionary rhetoric. Enslaved Africans sought freedom amid the chaos. In 1775, Virginia's royal governor, Lord Dunmore, offered freedom to enslaved men who joined British forces. Thousands fled to British lines. Some served in the Ethiopian regiment. Others became laborers or sailors. The British evacuated many formerly enslaved people to Nova Scotia and the Caribbean after the war, though freedom was often precarious. On the American side, some northern states began gradual emancipation during or after the war, yet slavery persisted in the South, a contradiction that would haunt the Republic. Native American nations faced devastating consequences. Many tribes, including segments of the Iroquois Confederacy, sided with the British, believing that British victory might restrain colonial expansion westward. Frontier warfare was brutal. Villages were destroyed. The Sullivan Expedition of 1779 targeted Iroquois settlements, devastating communities. Regardless of allegiance, native nations suffered displacement and loss of land as American expansion accelerated. By 1778, the British shifted strategy to the south, believing loyalist support was stronger there. They captured Savannah in 1778 and Charleston in 1780. The fall of Charleston was a severe blow to the American cause. British General Charles Cornwallis advanced through the Carolinas. The South descended into guerrilla warfare. Leaders such as Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, employed hit-and-run tactics. Battles at Camden, Cowpens, and Guilford Courthouse revealed a pattern. British tactical victories came at high cost. At Cowpens in January 1781, American General Daniel Morgan orchestrated a double envelopment that shattered a British force under Banastre Tarleton. At Guilford Courthouse in March 1781, Nathaniel Greene's army inflicted heavy casualties on Cornwallis, forcing him to retreat toward the coast. Greene's strategy, avoid decisive defeat, wear down the enemy, proved effective. Cornwallis eventually moved into Virginia, seeking a defensible position at Yorktown. There, in 1781, fate and coordination converged. Washington, encamped near New York, seized an opportunity. French forces under the Comte de Rochambeau joined his army. Crucially, a French fleet under Admiral de Grasse sailed to the Chesapeake Bay. In September 1781, at the Battle of the Chesapeake, the French Navy repelled a British fleet attempting to relieve Cornwallis. Trapped on the Yorktown Peninsula, Cornwallis faced a Franco-American siege. Artillery pounded British defenses. On October 19, 1781, Cornwallis surrendered approximately 8,000 troops. Though fighting continued elsewhere, Yorktown effectively ended major combat in North America. News of the defeat shocked Britain. Lord North reportedly exclaimed, "Oh God, it is all over." Peace negotiations began in Paris. American diplomats Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay maneuvered skillfully, sometimes negotiating directly with Britain rather than strictly through their French allies. The Treaty of Paris was signed in 1783. Britain recognized the independence of the United States and ceded territory east of the Mississippi River. The new nation doubled in size. Yet victory did not guarantee stability. The Articles of Confederation created a weak central government. Economic turmoil and interstate disputes plagued the young republic. In 1786-1787, Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts revealed the fragility of the political system. These crises led to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, where a stronger federal framework emerged. The Revolutionary War's global impact was profound. It inspired reformers and revolutionaries abroad. In France, financial strain from supporting the American cause contributed to fiscal crisis and ultimately the French Revolution. In Latin America, independence movements would later echo American precedents. The idea that a colony could overthrow a European empire reshaped political imagination. The war also forged enduring symbols.
Washington's resignation of his commission in 1783, surrendering military power to civilian authority, astonished European observers accustomed to military strongmen. King George III reportedly remarked that if Washington relinquished power, he would be the greatest man in the world. The precedent of civilian control became foundational. The Revolution's legacy, however, remains contested. The Declaration's promise of equality coexisted with slavery and dispossession. Women like Abigail Adams urged consideration of the ladies in new laws, but political rights remained restricted. African Americans, Native Americans, and women all confronted limits of the revolutionary vision. Yet the language of rights provided tools for future struggles. Economically, the war disrupted trade networks and devastated ports. Inflation ravaged the continental currency, hence the phrase, "not worth a continental." Soldiers often went unpaid. Many veterans returned to farms burdened by debt. Yet the opening of Western lands and the removal of imperial trade restrictions also created opportunities.
Militarily, the war demonstrated that an insurgent force could defeat a global empire through endurance, alliances, and strategic patience. Washington rarely sought decisive pitched battles after early defeats. Instead, he preserved his army, understanding that survival equaled resistance. As long as the Continental Army remained intact, the revolution lived. The British, for their part, faced logistical challenges. Supplying armies across the Atlantic was costly and slow. Political divisions within Britain complicated strategy. Public support for the war fluctuated. The empire was stretched thin by global commitments. In many respects, Britain did not lose solely on American battlefields. It lost in a wider geopolitical contest. Spies and intelligence networks played crucial roles. The Copper Ring in New York provided Washington with information about British movements. Invisible ink, coded messages, and double agents shaped campaigns. Benedict Arnold's treason in 1780, when he attempted to surrender West Point to the British, shocked the nation. His defection underscored the precariousness of loyalty in revolutionary times. Disease was as lethal as musket fire. Smallpox threatened the Continental Army repeatedly. Washington made a controversial decision in 1777 to inoculate troops, a risky but ultimately life-saving measure. The program reduced mortality and preserved fighting capacity. It was an early example of military public health policy. Weather influenced outcomes. Fog shielded Washington's escape from Brooklyn. Storms scattered fleets. Harsh winters tested endurance. Geography mattered as well. Vast distances, forests, rivers, and frontier settlements created a decentralized battlefield. When British troops evacuated New York in 1783, thousands of Loyalists departed with them, resettling in Canada, the Caribbean, or Britain. Their exile marked the war's human cost. For patriots, celebrations were tempered by uncertainty. The United States was independent, but unproven. Looking back, the American Revolutionary War appears monumental and inevitable. Yet at nearly every stage, it could have ended differently. A trapped army in Brooklyn, a failed alliance with France, a victorious British fleet at the Chesapeake, any of these might have altered history. Independence was not preordained, it was contingent. The war's enduring power lies not only in battlefield drama, but in ideological transformation. The assertion that legitimate government rests on consent, that sovereignty resides in the people, challenged centuries of monarchical tradition. These ideas were imperfectly realized, unevenly applied, and hotly debated, but they reshaped political discourse. From Lexington's green to Yorktown's trenches, from Valley Forge's snow to the signing table in Paris, the American Revolutionary War was a crucible of uncertainty. Farmers became soldiers, merchants became diplomats, enslaved men and women sought freedom in a fractured world. Empires recalculated strategy, ideas leapt oceans. The United States emerged from the conflict battered yet sovereign. Its survival depended not on a single hero or battle, but on a confluence of resilience, alliance, geography, and conviction. The Revolution's astonishment lies in its improbability, a collection of colonies, divided by region and interest, prevailing against the most formidable empire of the age. And so the story endures, not as a myth of flawless unity, but as a testament to contingency and courage. The American Revolutionary War was not simply the birth of a nation. It was the remaking of political possibility, achieved through years of sacrifice, doubt, and determination. The musket smoke has long since cleared, but the questions it raised about liberty, power, and equality continue to shape the United States and the world beyond its shores.
If you enjoyed this deep dive into George Washington's rise to power, make sure to subscribe for more powerful, fact-driven stories from American history. Hit the like button, share this with fellow history fans, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next chapter in the story of the United States. See you in the next episode.